It really is truly an honor to be here and to speak to such a diverse group who are members of the Organization of American States and INTEN and the International Literacy Association. This is a wonderful honor for me to share ideas with you, and I look forward to engaging with you in the next hour. My presentation will be in 3 parts. The first part, I'll be discussing significant components of effective collaborative discussions. The second part, we'll be looking at, particularly with our work with language learners, some things that are really effective practices, effective strategies that are helpful, and others that are ineffective. We want to identify those because those are often common things that we do without thinking that may not be as helpful to our students who are learning the language that we're teaching in. The final part is I wanted to share one practical strategy, one activity and technique that you can use for a range of texts and discussions. And also, you can also use this for across all age groups. And after that, I guess we'll have a time for discussion and question and answer. And I look forward to that. So let's get on with this presentation here. There's the title, Effectively Engaging Students in Collaborative Discussions, Building Comprehension Through Listening and Speaking. I wanted to start off by identifying about 6 different components of discussions, of effective discussions. And I'll read through these and then I'm going to come back and label them again so we can get a handle on them. Build on others' ideas and expressing their own clearly. These are things that we want to be looking for as students talk to each other. Are they sharing ideas? Are they building on their others? Are they expressing their own thoughts clearly? We'll talk about that in a moment. Come to discussions prepared, having read or studied required material, explicitly drawn on that preparation and other information known about the topic to explore ideas under discussion. Preparation is key to this whole piece, and there are a number of ways we can help prepare students before they get into a discussion on a text, and I'll be discussing that too. An essential part of collaborative discussions is to have a set of agreed upon rules for discussion and carrying out assigned roles. What happens oftentimes in discussions is that the dominant person in the group will do all the talking, and there may be people with terrific insights or thoughts about the text who don't feel comfortable to talk. This is where rules are very helpful. Particularly for English learners or language learners in a different language group. You may want to have rules that allow students, that call for students to sketch and draw their ideas because they may not have the words for it. We can talk further about that. Another component, key component of discussion is to pose and respond to specific questions by making comments that contribute to the discussion and elaborate on the remarks of others. Posing and responding to questions is not a natural activity. It's a learned skill. And there are several things that we can do to help provide that. Sometimes it's just providing an array of questions that students can draw from. And we'll look at that a little bit in a little bit here. And to review key ideas expressed and draw conclusions in light of information and knowledge gained from this discussion. I think it's really important to not just have people talk, but at the end, allow time to have students say, okay, what have we been talking about? Can we label these things as key ideas, as important thoughts? And finally, the next part of that is to summarize that discussion, to create an artifact, to use a written text, to bring it together, possibly using diverse media. It depends on the type of things you're discussing. It could be discussion of problem solving in mathematics. So quantitatively, how do we put that down? Or it could be just a summary that's done orally. We want to be looking for that. So I'm going to back up just a bit here and try to apply what I've just said. We're going to look at the key ideas. Let's go back just a little bit. For this first idea, I would label this a conversation. That's a shared conversation of ideas and expression. The second idea is preparation. We want to help students be prepared. We want to call on them to be contributing members who are well prepared in discussions. So we have conversation, preparation. The next part, questioning. We want to teach students to have great questioning strategies, to have an array of questions at the ready that they can contribute to a discussion and be engaged in active listening. And then review, key ideas. Be able to label what are the key ideas of that discussion rather than just letting it go on and drift off into the air. We want to be able to get handles on those key ideas by labeling those. And then to turn those labels into a summary of what is important. And that summary, I'm going to move on here, can be relayed in terms of products. A summary using possibly a written format or media sources to explain how each claim, how each one of those key ideas is supported by reasons and by evidence in the prepared text that they've looked at. And also, part of this whole idea is to sit back and identify and analyze, are there any fallacies in this? Are there any errors? Or maybe not even errors, but just better ways that we can express our thinking. So if we're engaged in a discussion, if we're monitoring as teachers, we're going to be looking for these points as markers, as benchmarks, I would say, for high quality discussion. I'm going to move on to the next part here. And this is a series of helpful strategies and unhelpful practices that happen oftentimes in classrooms. We may be aware of many of these helpful strategies, but sometimes we don't think in terms of, gee, what am I doing that's unhelpful for students? Before I get into this, I want to share a practice that I had with my own students, is that I would show a video of a teacher in Beijing, China, teaching a group of elementary school kids. The language is Mandarin, and for the most part, there might be one or two of my students who speak Mandarin, but the rest wouldn't be able to understand the language of instruction. And what I would ask them to do is I would say, when you're listening to this lesson, what were the components? What were the strategies that the teacher applied that helped you understand what was being taught? And what happened in the class that kept you confused and you couldn't understand? And remember, this was looking at a video of a lesson in a language that, for the most part, our students couldn't speak or understand. So they were looking for other things. Well, some of the key things that come from this type of exercise is that a helpful strategy is beginning to learn new concepts with explicit and concrete vocabulary instruction. I can't emphasize this enough. And vocabulary instruction should involve visuals, should involve real objects, should involve clues and images that contribute to the meaning. Let me give an example. Let's say I'm teaching to, I'm trying to teach a new word such as, how about, how about the word encyclopedia? Now, I can give just a definition of that word, but what if I break that apart? And I realize that I'm dealing with the word a cycle. There's an image there for a cycle. And pedia is this bank of knowledge. And creating an image for a bank of knowledge in a whole cycle, pulling those apart and creating images about that. Another example, let's say I wanted to teach the word gregarious. That's one of those words you go, oh, I think I know what that means. But if you dig into the etymology of that word, you find that there's an image of gregarious which is drawn from herding sheep and cattle. So someone who's gregarious is someone who herds, who brings people together. There's an image there that goes deeper than what you would see in a dictionary definition of the word. Something else that's a very helpful practice is providing reading previews, including overviews, highlights of difficult passages, as well as teaching that new vocabulary up front. Walking students through a passage, helping them highlight what is of value, what is really important here, helping them identify those key ideas, and working through that practice on a regular basis so that they can do that on their own. Conversely, there are unhelpful practices that oftentimes take place in classrooms. Falsely assuming that the language learner understands what they read because they can read the words aloud and pronounce them correctly. Being able to pronounce words correctly is a very superficial understanding of a text. I may be able to read any text and every word is said aloud, but getting to the deep meaning, the nuance, is a much deeper skill. And just assuming because you've assigned a reading text that people understand, that the students understand, is really a false practice and not very helpful. It goes back to, on the left side, teaching vocabulary, providing visuals, and structuring previews of that text to make sure it's understandable. Another piece that happens is teaching with misapplied or false cognates. Cognates are those bridge words that go across languages. One of my favorite cognates is, from my work with Cambodian population, is the word for a whale in the Cambodian language, Khmer, is baleen. Now, as you know, many of you know, baleen, it has French roots. It's a word we use in English, but it's that kind of substance that's in the mouth of a whale that helps them filter out krill. I'm assuming that because Cambodia was a colony of France, that they adopted that word baleen, but that's become a cognate in their language. But misapplying those cognates. In Spanish, we talk about, I've seen English speakers move to Spanish and they'll want to say the word for soup is sopa, or they want to say, they'll misapply that as a completely wrong word, but we want to be careful how we use those cognates. We oftentimes ask our students to just look words up in the dictionary as an exclusive means of understanding what they're doing. Dictionary definitions are difficult to understand. They're written in a very opaque style, and oftentimes they provide a whole range of meanings that may throw off a student. So using a dictionary is a helpful practice, but it needs linguistic supports. And again, that's going back to this idea of overviews, vocabulary instruction, visuals, and reality. Dictionaries by themselves are not enough. But so I encourage us to move beyond that. Some other helpful strategies and also unhelpful practices include assigning or providing reading with a purpose. They're looking to investigate solutions, to find solutions to problems, everyday problems such as what's going on in their lives, what's important to their students, to your students, looking to those as a purpose for their reading, not just reading because I told you so. As students are engaged in their reading, invite them to make comparisons, to say, what is this like? What is it not like? What else is it like? These types of questions, forming comparisons, are the beginnings and the seeds of theoretical and metaphorical thinking. When they see an image of an atomic explosion, it looks like a mushroom cloud. That's theoretical thinking, image thinking there. How is this salt cube look like an ice cube? Let's think about those and talk about how are these things alike? How are they not alike? And again, helping students expand their sentences with alternative adjectives, richer verbs, and transitional phrases. Oftentimes, students will volunteer something like, this character is bad. And you say, okay, that's an interesting observation. The character is bad. Let's expand that. Would you say the character is evil? Would you say the character is difficult? Would you say how would you do this? Part of the way that we help students expand is we provide either or kinds of questions. This character is bad. Would you say this character is evil, or would you say this character is just not helpful? And then you've embedded some answers in the question to help expand that. Verbs carry meaning, and to help them use richer verbs. They may be saying something like, well, I saw this the other day. And I say, okay, well, let's think of that word, you saw it. Are there other words that can convey that you saw it? Did you examine this? Did you observe what was going on? Did you analyze? What are other ways, other richer verbs that we can put in there? And then also providing transitional phrases, such as, in other words, or on the other hand, or furthermore, to help students use academic language as they're speaking, which is a discourse that needs to be taught. And we just can't expect them to learn that on their own. On the other side, unhelpful practices. Oftentimes you'll see teachers failing to allow wait time for language learners to think about their answers before responding. It's hard for speakers, for teachers up in front of a group, to sit quietly and wait as people form their ideas. I found one thing that was very helpful is to hold my hands behind my back and physically count to 10 as I waited for students to think about responses to questions. Another technique that I recommend is having students talk to each other and share their ideas first before raising their hands. And then instead of calling on the student to tell me their own thinking, I would call on their partner that they spoke with and told them, tell me what your partner said. What was their thinking? That has the additive impact of paraphrasing, of active listening, of engaging all learners in sharing ideas. But it takes time to do that, and realizing that maybe a couple of very well thought out questions that allow for time, that require time, are better than a whole series of quick answer questions. I've observed in schools all over the United States and Latin America, and it seems like we love to ask students to copy definitions assigned from word lists. And I would ask us to not make that a primary assignment. I think if anything, that probably is an activity that is not very motivating for students, and it would turn them off to the beauty of words. I don't know if I need to say more on that, but just copying definitions It's a low-level activity. It's not cognitively demanding, and it also is a demotivator in what we're doing. I've been in situations where, unfortunately, I've seen teachers mocking a student's misspelling. Spelling is a very difficult task that comes easily to few and is difficult for many people. I'll tell you, as I'm a well-educated person, at times I struggle with spelling. I look at the word misspellings and I think, is that 2 S's or 1? Oh, I guess it's 2. But spelling is an easy thing to correct. Let's not mock that. And I mean easy to correct is that we have spell checkers, we have folks who can do peer editing. We can work on that, but let's not embarrass students with their invented spellings. If I could just say one more thing about spelling is that oftentimes the most logical way to spell a word is not the conventional way to spell a word. In other words, when I spell the word mayonnaise, but I really look at that word, it more looks like mayonesa instead of mayonnaise. It's not necessarily a logical way to spell the word, but it's conventions. So we want to have a lot of understanding with our students in terms of their spelling, but provide supports for that. Along those same lines, on an oral basis, particularly when we're talking about collaborative discussions, if we're evaluating speech only according to conventions of grammar and punctuation, we may be neglecting the real big ideas. Sometimes a student will have a tremendous idea, but not know the exact words to say, or maybe not have the correct grammatical structure to say it. We can help students. One of the ways we can help them, for example, if a student says, you know, I like that historic idea about that guy who won the battle, but you know that guy who won the battle? Well, and you could hear a student struggling with their language, and you could say, well, that guy who won the battle. I'm going to use an American analogy here. Oh, you're talking about George Washington at the Battle of Concord. Is that what we're talking about here? And you can mirror back appropriate conventional speech without having to make that the point of contention. Well, I've shared with you a variety of strategies that are helpful and unhelpful practices. What I'd like to do, and I'm going to place this in the chat box, is this. There we go. There we go. I put in the chat box right now this web link. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this. This is an infographic that I put together based upon one of my books that I hope that you enjoy. So right now, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to show you this infographic. Okay, I hope you can still hear me and see. This is a infographic that goes through by language level a number of those practices that are helpful in green and unhelpful in red. And I just wanted to provide that to you as a resource. I hope you can use that in your classrooms. It's taken from my book, Helping English Language Learners to Meet the Common Core. And I just wanted to make that available to you as a tool that you can use in your own classrooms. Wonderful, wonderful, good. You saw the infographic, I'm glad. Okay, let's move on to the next section. This is where I'd like to share a particular idea to help foster collaborative discussions. And going back to the components of a collaborative discussion: sharing and expressing ideas, being prepared to come into a discussion, having agreed upon rules, forming and answering questions, reviewing those key ideas, getting handles on those key ideas, and then summarizing that all in a product of a written text or maybe using media. Let's start with preparation here. We'll begin with a text for students to read or experience. Sometimes a text can also be a video. But before getting into that, we want to share and teach key vocabulary, main ideas of the text, just like I said in terms of helpful strategies of going over, outlining what they're going to see and giving a preview. Now that may take place the day before you get into your discussion, because you want to allow time for students to be prepared. Let's say that they've learned the vocabulary, they've outlined it, they've gone through and they've read the text or they viewed the video or what have you. Now they're ready to discuss. So we'll organize the class into equal-sized small groups. I say 4 to 6 students. I like to work with 4 students because of timing. Because what we want to do is we want to give every single student an opportunity to talk. If they're in smaller groups, that increases their opportunity. When they're in their small groups, have each student number themselves. 1 would be student number 1, 2, student number 2, 3, student number 3, 4, student number 4, in that order. And then you're going to tell the students, here's a rule. You have 1 minute to talk, and student number 1 is going to begin. And this person is going to talk about something that was important in that text. And everybody else in the group is going to listen and think about questions, but for the 1 minute, they're just going to listen to the other person talk. And if you have an egg timer or some sort of timer to set on your watch or on your phone, set that timer for 1 minute and get the group ready to go. So you'll begin with student number 1. And that student is asked to discuss the most significant part of the text according to that student. What struck them? What did they find most interesting? And they can talk about it for 1 minute. Even though they may not be finished talking about it, at the end of a minute, you say, stop. All right, student number 2, now it's your turn. You talk about what was most significant to you in that text. And the group listens to student number 2. At the end of a minute, stop, student number 3. After another minute, then student number 4. So you get the idea there. Every single student has an opportunity to talk, and be prepared because it'll be noisy in your room. And everybody will be talking and listening. Then there may be taking some time to engage with each other. All right, what we've done in terms of components of discussion, we've had sharing of ideas and expressing of what those ideas are about. We've had students prepared with vocabulary and outline of the text beforehand. And we've began with some agreed upon rules where the one student who's talking has the floor and the others are listening. I want to come back to this idea of rules because sometimes rules are very important to maintain equal opportunity for all parties based on including factors of English learners or language learners. I have the same opportunity as very fluent language speakers. Gender is an issue where girls and boys will have equal opportunity to speak and be heard. And I think that's key to this whole process, these rules. So we repeat this sequence with each student until every single student has had an opportunity to discuss what was important in their opinion. And this is all going on simultaneously. Then, this is a structured piece that's a little bit different from your typical discussion. I call it the class vote. We go back to each group. Let's say you have a group of 32 students, 4 students in each group, so you've got 8 different groups going. Ask the students in each group to decide what was the most significant or interesting topic among the 4 that they talked about. So they're going to take some time and talk to each other and say, well, I like number 3's idea. Well, no, I thought number 2's idea was stronger because of this. And they start to go back and forth and get into a discussion about what was the most important thing that came up in their discussion. Then you ask the students to provide an interesting title to summarize what that group was about, what that significant idea is about. And they can have funny titles, it doesn't matter, it can be a very creative experience. And the teacher would then, on the board, write one title brought forward by each group. So if there were 8 groups going on, you're going to have 8 different titles on the board. All right, then looking at those, then ask the class to vote on which is the most significant title that they want to hear about. Which is the one that seems most interesting to them. And so you select one of those titles. Let me just review this really quickly because this is an important structured component. The students have every single student has shared what they thought was important. Then the groups decide what they think was most important in their own discussion. Then the entire class selects which it would be the most interesting component of that text based upon a vote of titles. All right. Now, you think, oh, are we done with the discussion? No, we're not done. It moves into the next part. It moves into a collaborative interview. Let's say that in one group, student number 3 had the most interesting title that was selected by the whole group. So then the teacher invites that individual up to the front of the class and to sit in a chair. And then the entire class is invited to interview that student. And the teacher moderates the discussion. My experience with this activity is that at first students don't know what to ask. So a very helpful tool is to have displayed in the room a question bank. Here, this is one example of a question bank. There's other ways to do this, where you ask who, what, when, where, why, and how types of questions. This can be displayed on a chart at the front of a room, and students can look up there and just begin to ask an appropriate question. These are not all the questions that could be asked, but one of the things a teacher could do is maybe facilitate by saying, who would like to ask a what question? Pick one and ask one. And then a student from the class asks that interviewee a what question. Now here's an important part of this. Let's say the interviewee is not very fluent in the language. Well, the interviewee may just answer in one word. But that's okay, because what happens next is that the teacher can help that. Let's say that they asked about where did this take place? And the student says, Ghana, country in Africa. And that's all the student says is Ghana. Then the teacher looks back to the student who asked the question and say, okay, can you tell me in a full sentence what the answer is to your question. And that forces the other student to say, the story took place in Ghana, in a full sentence. And at that point, the teacher models how to write down that full sentence on the board or on a large sheet of paper. Now, my experience with interviews is that they go in a non-linear format. They're not always go in a logical format. You get a lot of different information on that. So after you get a number of responses to a wide range of questions, where the interviewee provides an answer to their ideas, and then the person who asked the question elaborates what the response should be, and then the teacher writes those down, you'll have a whole range of unordered responses and statements about the topic of discussion. At that point, you ask the students to say, okay, let's look back at what we've got written down here. What are the key ideas that help us understand this text? And if it's written on a large sheet of paper, it's nice to pull out a different colored pen and circle those key ideas. And then you can ask students to say, now that we've been through this discussion, and you've taken notes on this as well, for your homework, I want you to take these ideas and I'd like you to arrange them in a logical sequence, in a logical order. And we'll come back the next day and do some more work with this. As you can see, this is a very elaborate process, and it involves sharing of key ideas, preparation, agreed upon rules, formulating questions, reviewing key ideas, and then organizing those in a logical order. But then coming back together, let's say the next day, students now have their work of the discussion arranged in a logical order according to their opinion. Using the tools in the classroom, it could be that you have the tools are paper. It could be the tools are media oriented, where you can have PowerPoints, or I don't know if you're familiar with Prezis, or maybe even using a video camera from a cell phone to present a summary of that discussion and what was important. This takes you full circle on a collaborative discussion that involves critical thinking, that involves participation of all parties, that involves active learning, preparation, and it involves time and energy. It's not just taking 15 minutes to talk. If you notice what I said, the preparation begins on day 1. The structured collaborative discussion and vote takes place on day 2. And then coming back with homework of organizing these ideas in a logical sequence. On day 3, it's creating a presentation to provide a summary or synthesis back to the rest of the group. Well, these are the ideas that I'm happy to share with you. I hope that infographic would be a helpful tool for you in using language-based strategies that are extremely helpful for language learners, and also being aware of practices that are not helpful.